Welcome to episode 31 of the Eyes on Privacy podcast. This week, I'm joined by Keith Watson, and I'm Preston Wiley. And today, we're going to talk about a security issue with some cars. So Keith can introduce what we're going to talk about.
All right. So in late July 21st, there was an article published in Wired, the website for Wired, and it was discussing basically that two security researchers were able to compromise a moving vehicle while it was traveling in a distant city at 70 miles an hour. So that's kind of the tagline they hook you with. And so what's interesting is this is work done by Charlie Miller, who is well known in the security vulnerability space, and Chris Velasek, and he works for IO Active. And these two gentlemen have been looking at cars and the electronics and network capabilities of cars for a while. And what's changed in the last few years is the number of vehicles, new vehicles that are on the road, that when you buy them, they have some sort of network services built into them. And so in this case, this was the Chrysler Fiat or Fiat Chrysler's Jeep model, and it has a system called Uconnect, which is basically a cellular data network service inside the car. And that can be used for, any number of things. If you're driving through town and you want to stream some music or check road conditions or traffic or look at map data, that's all features of these types of systems. There's also been ads that I've seen from Chevrolet where they have wireless hotspots in their vehicles. And so if the kids in the back seat want to stream YouTube, that's a feature now that's part of these vehicles. Anyways, what this means is now when your car is running, it's on a network and it's connected to the internet. This particular system that Jeep has is connected to the Sprint cellular network, and that's really where the problem lies, because this basically means you have a car with an IP address and it can be accessible from the internet. And so some of the research that Charlie Miller and Chris Velasek did was related to looking at the vulnerabilities in these systems. In the past, they've looked at systems like the Toyota Prius, and they were able to rip the dash off that and find some interesting problems there. But that car didn't have these full-time, always-on network capabilities that the Jeep systems and some of the others do as well. Basically, they found the vulnerability in the firmware of the system, which allowed them to take control of the vehicle. And so, for example, some of the things they were able to do were, put an image on the display, disable the ignition, turning the car on and off, that sort of thing. So they had basically complete control of the vehicle, and they didn't have to be physically present to have that control. So that's very interesting, obviously, especially that these vehicles are subject to these types of attacks now. So you've probably seen the whole movie plot where somebody is remotely controlling somebody else's vehicle, and we thought, haha, that's funny, that's only in the movies. Well, now these are consumer vehicles, and they're available today. So that's where the really interesting things come. And there's a computer network inside most of the cars, and it's called the CAN bus, which is basically a kind of an industry standard in terms of networking inside cars. And these are networking systems that are used to communicate with the vehicle safety systems, the entertainment system, the engine management system, lights, all that stuff. And so that's one network that can be used once the attacker gains a foothold to command and control other parts of the car. And so that's where the really interesting stuff lies. And so there's lots of little details we could talk about. Chrysler has already provided an update to correct a particular vulnerability in this case, and Sprint, which is the network provider for Uconnect, is blocking access to the port where this vulnerability, or at least one of the software vulnerabilities, lies. So there's kind of a workaround and a software fix available, but this is still quite a few number of cars that still have to be patched and fixed. So I thought we'd start there and talk a little bit about some of the details of it, and then some of not only the security impacts, but there's some privacy impacts as well here.
Well, first I thought one of the interesting things that I read is these two hackers have, this isn't their first time delving into a automotive hack either. They had one several years ago where they were able to basically take control of a car. The only issue was they actually had to be connected physically to the car. And, you know, they pointed this out to the automotive industry, and they were like, well, you know, you have to be physically connected to the car. So really, this isn't much of a problem. And, you know, so they kind of warned them at the time, and they weren't really taken seriously. So in response to that, they, you know, kept going further and further, and they essentially were like, hey, look, we got some cellular connections. Maybe we can mess around with those. And they essentially dedicated themselves to finding a way to do what essentially they did, because the automotive industry was not taking security seriously, and they wanted to essentially show, look, you should take it seriously. So it looks like maybe they're actually starting to listen, and Congress is actually starting to kind of step in and look at it as well.
Right. Also, if you look at the Washington Post article, that's also part of our list, there's some discussion from Peter Zatko, also known as Mudge, who now works for DARPA, and he's been pointing out a lot of these issues with vehicles as well. And so DARPA has actually got some projects looking at this, and there was a 60 Minutes news piece several months ago in which they had Leslie Stahl in a vehicle, and she was driving along, and similar issue. They remotely controlled that vehicle and took it to a stop, and then you know, sudden acceleration and all that stuff, and they were all doing that through similar network-based features remotely. So that was also, you know, not just Jeep having problems here. And so yes, there's a lot of people talking about it, and Congress is interested in it, I think, not only from the, you know, the safety aspect, but if you recall, a couple years ago, Toyota had issues with sudden acceleration, which they eventually tracked down to being a software bug. And so having a software bug control the acceleration of your vehicle was certainly concerning to them and the National Highway Safety Administration. I get that right? Something like that. The National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. There it is. And that group was very interested in how Toyota dealt with those particular issues as well. And so this is, you know, the fact is, any car you buy today has a ton of software in it. And it's not all well-written software. It's not similarly tested like flight systems are that have to be certified by the FAA. We don't have anything like that in the automotive industry currently. I don't know if we'll be heading that way, but that's certainly something that may be a shakeout of this. There's also the discussion on airplanes and the connection between the entertainment system in airplanes and the avionics of airplanes. You know, we have a similar issue here in cars. Is the entertainment unit for audio and, you know, mapping systems and maybe even your heater air conditioning controls, is that connected to the same CAN bus which connects all the other systems in the car? And maybe that's not such a good idea. Maybe that should be a one-way communication path instead of two-directional, bidirectional paths. So there's a lot of technical issues here that still have to be addressed, not only in how we build these things, but also whether we should provide a lot of these capabilities. Of course, customers are going to ask for it, certainly, and so it's the burden of the car manufacturer to make sure that their safety is also addressed as well.
Right, and I've never programmed automotive software, so I don't know the hurdles that go into the designing of that and how much they actually need access to those kind of controls. But customers like to have control over their vehicles and things like that. So it's hard to say, well, you can't do that. But it seems like there should be some sort of safeguards in there to prevent this. Now, from a privacy issue, I believe the article also talks about how they were able to go on the Sprint network, which is what the Uconnect network connects to, and it seems to be isolated to the Sprint network, but they were able to get essentially a burner phone, I think, on the Sprint network, and were able to see over 400,000 vehicles that were potentially vulnerable to this exploit that they were using, and they were able to essentially figure out where they were and track them. And they were like, oh, this one's over here in Texas and this one's over here in California, and they were able to figure out where they were and essentially map them. Now they weren't able to figure out who was in the car because they have essentially randomized VIN numbers and just IP addresses that were assigned to them by the cell tower and things like that. But still, that if you know somebody's VIN number and they have a car, they have this type of car, then you have something, and you could essentially track them from place to place. So I think that's a pretty significant privacy issue.
Yeah, certainly it is. And if you have that level of control over somebody's car, one way you could track them, if you can, is through the Bluetooth connection, because probably most of these systems are going to have their owners connecting their Bluetooth phones to the entertainment system so they can make calls using the interior audio system. And that probably would be a way, because each Bluetooth phone has a MAC address through the Bluetooth system. So if you know the Bluetooth MAC address of the person you're interested in, you could probably find them that way and track them when they're actually in the vehicle, because their phone's going to sync up with the vehicle when they get inside. At least that's how mine works. So that might be one way to do it too. So you could also, like my car, for example, will take my contacts, so that if I want to make a call, I can tell it who I want to call, and it looks through my contacts database and can find the right person. So certainly that data could be at risk as well. So there's a lot of interesting work going on in trying to find these vulnerabilities, and I think any issues that come out of this may be a big problem for auto manufacturers, either through imposed regulation or any number of lawsuits that they're probably going to see over this problem. So, yeah, we thought airplanes were going to be a problem for software vulnerabilities, and now we're looking at cars as being the problem here. And so this kind of goes to this bigger issue of what some people like to call the Internet of Things, and that's basically connecting up all these devices and connecting them to the network and seeing what value we can derive from having all these devices connected, whether they're collecting information, providing us more information about what we're doing or things we're interested in, services we might be using, or just generating enough data and passing it on to somebody else who finds value in it. And how we connect these systems up and what level of security is needed to protect the data and these devices is certainly something that's still a big issue. It's not yet addressed. And cars are just one component of this big Internet of Things.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that as well. I think we've talked about the Internet of Things before, and on here, and I mean the obvious idea is figuring out what we can connect to the internet and what can we get you and how useful is it, like connecting your refrigerator and your toaster and your thermostat and your security system, your doors, your garage door, your fireplace, just connecting things up to the internet for essentially to get it connected home. Maybe you can turn your lights, maybe you can have it turn your lights on before you get home, or it knows when you're coming home, and it can turn your thermostat up while you're on your way home to essentially save energy and things like that. And there's I think there's a value to that. Saving energy and making things more convenient, but there's also security ramifications to all of that stuff. And I think automotives are especially vulnerable because those actually can have pretty significant safety issues if people are able to essentially access them and control your car. I can only imagine how, the article talks about the experience of being in this car while somebody is messing with it, and essentially not knowing if when you hit the gas pedal, if your car's actually going to speed up, not knowing when you hit the brakes, if your car's going to slow down, and watching your windshield wipers just go crazy when you didn't do anything. And that probably is not a comfortable experience.
No, I wouldn't think so. And I know that, especially in the Toyota sudden acceleration case, the people in the car were actually calling 911 for assistance because their brakes didn't work. The accelerator wasn't pushed to the floor and stuck. The software was taking control, and there was no way for them to do anything. They were traveling faster than highway speeds, and emergency brake is ineffective. You're only locking one wheel with an emergency brake. It's not enough to stop a vehicle at 85, 90 miles an hour. And their brakes didn't work either. And so that's a scary situation. In fact, sadly, that did not have a good outcome for them. So certainly, this is definitely a safety problem, and more than a safety problem, it's really a software problem. And car companies haven't really had to think about how to do reliable, secure software, and now they do, and they don't know what they're doing yet. So hopefully that will figure it out pretty soon, but that's a big problem. If you look at the flight equivalent, the FAA has certification processes for software to make sure that before that software gets installed in plane avionics, it's well tested. They look for all these problems. They have a methodology for designing and developing that software. We don't have anything like that in anywhere else, really. If you look at it, whether it be your car, even your computer, in some cases, bugs are there. And sometimes as we start using more and more systems to control the physical environment, we're going to run into these bugs, and they're going to be taken advantage of either through, malicious intent or unavoidable accidents, or there's going to be a corner case in which that computer system is going to encounter an error and not handle it well. And when that happens, that's when people get hurt. Buildings are lost, people are lost, cars are, attacked and damaged, and people inside killed and seriously injured. And so all of these organizations, companies that are building software and connecting it up to a malicious network need to have better controls over their software, and we're just not there yet. Of course, we're not there on the enterprise software side either. So
it's
a common problem.
It's also interesting to note that these hackers we were talking about, they did give a questionnaire to various companies, and they identified this particular car, the Jeep Cherokee, as the most vulnerable, potentially the most vulnerable vehicle that they could find. And I think they didn't identify what car companies answered which questions which way, but it seemed like there were some car companies on the list that were actually doing things in a much better manner. They were testing the software. They were doing things, but we don't know who they were because they're not going to publish. They're not going to publish that. So it seems like there are a few car companies that are actually caring about this stuff.
Sure.
But there's some that there's a majority of them aren't doing everything that they could possibly do to secure their systems. But there's some are.
Well, yeah, I don't disagree with that, but until you know which car is safe or not, it's a big question mark. If you're in the market for a new vehicle, which one do you get? Maybe you get one without that network connection right now.
Right. I mean, that is the question. I mean, this stuff does look bad to the car companies that do them, and that in itself is a driving force to kind of somewhat fix these issues. Is that this doesn't look good for us, so we need to do something about it.
Absolutely. Yep. That's certainly something I bet they're thinking about in boardrooms and meeting rooms all across the car company landscape. So we'll see.
So yeah, and that's we'll see what the response is, and I think this is somewhat new territory, and almost with every new territory that you run into for security it's getting it out the door, getting it out to customers, as fast as possible, being the first on the market, and things like that. And unfortunately, you can't always rush it out the door, and security takes time.
Yeah, and especially it's hard to fix after it's already out the door. As recalls have shown, they're very costly to do once the customer already has the vehicle in their garage.
Speaking of that,
yes,
this particular thing with the Jeep Cherokee is actually something that you can update yourself.
Yes, it's very interesting.
Which is kind of different as well. You can actually update your install and update via a USB flash drive, so you don't actually have to take it to the dealer to do the software upgrade.
If you go to the Uconnect website, you enter your VIN and it'll tell you if you need to upgrade it.
So that's I'd say somewhat of a new development too, not having to go to a dealer to essentially update your car.
Yeah, exactly. Because for example, we have a Honda vehicle that unfortunately has been recalled due to the Takata airbag problem. And that's a case where I can't download something. So that's definitely got to go into the shop to get that fixed. So
right, and I actually think automotive companies have been hesitant to allow customers to do anything to their car and not bring it to the dealer, just because of what if they do
warranty,
it wrong.
You want to cover the warranty side of it, but also it's revenue for the dealership as well.
Right, and
if you're there to have your car serviced for recall work, you might get the oil changed or have it detailed or whatever. And so that's just more for the repair side of the auto business.
So if you do have a Uconnect, a vehicle that has Uconnect, you can go to their website and enter your VIN number and see if you do need to update. And if you do need to update, they have some software that you can download and put it on your USB flash drive and install it yourself. So, or you could take it into a dealer and they would do it.
Yep.
So you don't have to do it yourself.
So yeah, if you get that recall notice, you might want to get that fixed.
Right. So that's what we had to talk about. Anything else to say about this issue?
No, I think we kind of scratched the surface of the bigger issue that we're going to see in the future. So I think it's good that we have people interested in trying to attack these types of systems. Hopefully we'll have car companies that are quick to respond and get these things fixed. It wasn't, I can't say that I thought, even 5 years ago that we'd have to apply software updates in our vehicles as quickly as we do in our enterprises, but maybe we're moving that direction now.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you connect things to the internet, you have a lot more. You expose yourself a lot more than if you just leave them not connected, I suppose.
Yep.
I mean, the most secure computer is one that's turned off, but if you disconnect the internet from it, you're a lot more secure than if you're connected to that internet. And the same is true for a car, which has a computer in it.
Yeah. I like to think of it as if you're not connected to the internet, it's just fewer people to mess with it.
Yes. Yep. So anyway, thank you to Keith Watson. I'm Preston Wiley, and keep your eyes on privacy.